By training aerobically, overall adaptation will occur. This is because during performance in an aerobic event, such as a marathon or even a football match, they'll have a larger VO2. This means that their body is able to use more oxygen and use it better and more economic. By having better overall endurance, it can reduce the risks of diseases such as obesity and high blood pressure. This is important as these diseases can have an impact on a person's health both currently and in the future. Cardiovascular adaptations. One way that adaptations will occur in the cardiovascular system is through cardiac hypertrophy. This is when the strength of an athlete's heart will increase. Because of this, it means that the heart is able to pump more blood out per beat. This is also known as the increased stroke volume. This means that the heart doesn't have to contract or beat as many times to send the same amount of oxygenated blood around the body to the working muscles. This is compared to an unfit person. For example, at rest, an untrained person has a stroke volume of between 50 to 70 milliliters of blood. However, a highly trained athlete can have a stroke volume of up to 90 to 110 milliliters per beat. This suggests that their heart is more economic. This will also impact the resting heart levels, as when the cardiac hypertrophy increases, the resting heart rate will decrease, as the heart is able to supply the tissues around the body with the amount of oxygen needed. However, the heart is able to pump out more blood, so it doesn't have to beat as many times per minute. If they're healthy, they can have a heart rate of below 60, which is known as bradycardic. One way we can show adaptation is through a heart rate graph. This was taken from our multi-stage fitness test. As you can see, at rest, before training, they had a heart rate of around 84 beats per minute. However, we would expect this to decrease after training to around 60 to 62 if they trained well. You can also see that during activity their heart rate did increase. It increased to over 140 beats per minute at level 8 of the multi-stage fitness test. If this athlete had a better cardiovascular system, we would still expect their heart rate to go up. However, it could only reach around 120 beats per minute if they were well trained. In addition to someone who is trained better, they'll have a higher heart rate range. This is the difference between your resting heart rate and your maximal heart rate. For example, comparing two 20-year-olds where one is trained and one is untrained. Both will have a maximum heart rate of 200 beats per minute. The trained person could have a resting heart rate of around 60 beats per minute. This means that their heart rate range is 140 beats. However, an untrained person might have a resting heart rate of around 80 beats per minute. This will mean that they have a lower heart rate range of only 120 beats. As you can see by the table on the left, blood pressure will also change at rest. For example, someone who is well trained will have a lower resting systolic blood pressure. And also, during activity, their resting diastolic blood pressure will be the same as it is at maximal exercise. However, if the person is less trained, it's likely to increase. This can also be shown in our multi-stage fitness test measuring our blood pressure. As you can see from our multi-stage fitness test, pre-training they had a much higher blood pressure than they did post-training. As you can see, pre-training their resting blood pressure was around 130/70. However, after training we could expect the systolic blood pressure to decrease to around 120 to maybe 110, and also their diastolic pressure to decrease to maybe around 60. This will show adaptation as their heart has become stronger and is able to pump more blood around at a lower pressure. In addition to this, other vascular system adaptations will occur. One way is by decreasing blood viscosity. This means that the blood is more thin and able to flow around the body easier. This could be due to the increase in blood plasma. This will reduce the blood pressure at rest, as it's easier to pump thinner blood around the body compared to someone who has a higher blood viscosity and therefore thicker blood. Also, a person who is more fit will have a higher hematocrit. This is the ratio of red blood cells to the total volume of blood. If someone is physically healthier, they will have a higher ratio, so they are able to carry more oxygen around the blood in the red blood cells. This is because there's more hemoglobin in the blood, which is what oxygen binds to be carried around the body. This will also link to another adaptation of larger blood volume. If someone has adapted to their training, they could have a larger blood volume, which will increase the amount of red blood cells that are in the body. This means that they can also carry more oxygen around the body. Finally, they'll have more capillaries surrounding muscle fibers, which will increase the amount of oxygen that can be delivered to the muscle fibers, where oxygen will be able to diffuse into the muscles, and carbon dioxide will be able to diffuse out of the muscles. As you can see from this graph on the right that shows the cardiac output during different intensities and speeds on a treadmill, this would suggest that more blood is being pumped out by a stronger, more trained person. This means that an athlete will be able to perform a higher intensity for longer periods of time, as suggested by the graph. As you can see, at 5 kilometers an hour, they had a similar cardiac output, but it was slightly different. As pre-trained, they had a cardiac output of around 5 liters per minute. However, when they were trained, they had a slightly higher of around 6 liters per minute of blood. You can also see that at the end of this treadmill, before they were trained, they could only last to around 18 kilometers an hour. This is when their cardiac output was around 20 liters of blood per minute. However, post-training, this graph shows that they were able to go for a higher intensity of around 22 kilometers an hour. And at the same time, their heart was able to pump out more blood per minute. This increase in cardiac output will have a very positive impact on aerobic activity. For example, as this graph shows, they will be able to run at a faster speed before eventually tiring and fatiguing and stopping the event. In addition to this means that they are able to supply the muscles with more oxygenated blood, and therefore they are able to use the aerobic energy system compared to using anaerobic glycolytic system and the ATP-PC system. By increasing the cardiac dynamics, it will eventually reduce the risk of cardiovascular diseases. One example would be coronary heart disease. This is because there will be less fatty deposits in the arteries around the heart. Because of this, it means that the heart will be able to have a constant and better supply of oxygenated blood to all parts. This means that there will be less risks when performing exercise.